Good morning, everybody. It's Michael Warren here from the BioIndustry Association. Welcome to our COVID-19 update webinar. This week, we're focusing on running a life science business, specifically looking at supporting staff and managing operations. I'm delighted to be joined today by our CEO, Steve Bates. Morning, Steve.
Morning, Michael.
And our special guests today are fantastic, actually. We've got Priya Mande from PsiOxus Therapeutics, one of our leading biotech companies, member of the BIA. Morning, Priya. Don't know whether you're muted, but say hello if you're not. You are, okay. Come to you in a second. And then secondly, we're joined by Gareth Jones, who's a director, people and change at one of our member companies, KPMG. Everyone will know KPMG, doing some fantastic work advising businesses on how to make their way successfully through the crisis. Gareth, give us lots of top tips and specifically a kind of a view from how things look across the breadth of British industry, which I think should be quite interesting. But look, there's loads to get through today. So as ever, we're tight on time, going to talk less and try and move us through fairly quickly. One thing I do want to say up front, though, is I'll just show you the agenda, is that we're very keen to look at your questions and comments, again, as with previous weeks. So please do start firing your questions and comments into the questions box on the control panel right now. I'll have a look at those as we're going and make sure I drop your questions in at various points in the conversation. I want to make this as interactive as we can. So please, you've got something you want to put to Steve or one of our guests, please start doing that now. So the agenda looks like a quick run through from Steve on latest developments on COVID-19. It's been an incredibly busy week, only 7 days, but a lot has happened. So hopefully about 10 minutes on that, and then we're going to turn to Priya first, and then Gareth to look at some specific advice and perspectives on how things look out at the front line in businesses. Then we're going to come back, me and Steve, to talk to you a little bit more about opportunities to get involved and put you in touch with the right people, the contact points, and then we'll loop back round on further questions and comments at the end. So there we go. Okay, let's get into the latest news. So what's happened in the last 7 days? Steve, work has continued to ramp up across the life sciences industry on potential solutions. You pulled this one out, the recovery trial. Looks impressive, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that we've always had a strength in the UK life science sector is the ability to do clinical trials. And I'm conscious that many companies won't be working on COVID-19, but I hope it's useful for you to see just how flexible and adaptable the sector has been. And I think it's useful to understand this, even if your companies aren't working on COVID-19. But I think if you look at the adaptive trial design that's being rolled out from recovery trial based out of Oxford, I think that will give some really interesting insights linked into the new infrastructure in the NHS around COVID-19. And from that, I think real data that is meaningful for many of the candidate therapeutics will come out. And you can see that BioIndustry are running a big tracker now of the amount of clinical studies. I know that there's a discussion in the community about how you do those most appropriately at scale and in good ways. And I think the UK will be playing a fundamental part in that. And you can see deals like the one that GSK have done mean that increasingly there are looks at antibodies and antibody approaches therapeutically and prophylactically being important. And of course, we've got a BIA group in that, which we are bringing alongside others, which I think is increasingly something that is coming to the fore, as well as vaccines and repurposed products.
Yeah, absolutely. But we've continued, I mean, talking about our sector though and our companies, I mean, fantastic announcement from GSK investing in a biotech company, Vir. I mean, this is kind of getting onto the future, isn't it? So potential antibody treatments, as I understand it. I mean, that looks impressive, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting to see them partner with a West Coast American company on this one. I think there's actually quite a lot of this that's actually here in the UK as well. So you know, I think AstraZeneca have some great capability, and I know from companies around Cambridge, Kymab, and others that actually the UK smaller companies have a real powerhouse of knowledge and experience. And if you link that to some of the work coming out of NIHR. And also the genomics groups, I think the UK can really play a part in what will be a global benefit on antibody plays.
Well, that's right. And if I just put a screen grab there of the BioSentry tracker. I mean, actually, quite a large number of UK-based trials getting up and running. I mean, the number is growing every day. That's a number I took yesterday. I just counted down the list. 108 clinical studies worldwide and 104 preclinical. I mean, a lot of those are in China and the US, obviously, but good representation from the UK in there as well, I think.
And I think also, as the UK clinical trial base becomes effective in this space, one of the things we'll need to do is attract US and other companies who are looking to do global trials to do some here. And I think we've got a great base to do it from here, and we should be confident in talking about that with partners we would have worked in other diseases, and those who work in clinical trials should talk up the UK opportunity here.
Yeah, but it is going to be a global effort, isn't it? So I mean, 3 things I noticed this week. Firstly, that welcome call for £6 billion UK pounds or $8 billion as it was written up. The Gates kind of oversupply of capacity in the manufacturing side for vaccines development. And then that thing we spotted on Gordon Brown's website, wasn't it? The international leaders kind of call for coordinated action. I mean, that's all kind of continuing a narrative that's already out there, but it's ramping all the time.
So I think the reason why this is important for our sector is normally we wouldn't focus on sort of G7 or G20 issues. We've seen it a bit with antimicrobial resistance, but my sense is that what we're seeing this week is the wiring between the organisations that have underpinned things like CEPI, the Wellcome, looking at working in this global environment, really trying to see whether the G20, the G7 can be used for a significant global push, particularly in terms of money to tackle COVID-19. If this were to come off, and I think there's a reasonable chance that this may unlock the types of investment that UK bioscience would be well placed to face the challenge on. So it's really interesting to see this, and I think for those of us who've been looking at scale up and development, it's really interesting. I always like it, if I agree with Bill Gates, to see that his view is that if we're going to be in the right place for vaccines for the globe, we need to start building the factories to make those vaccines now. And those of you who followed the vaccine scale up work that we've been doing, and in a sense this is what we are anticipating. We need to be ready to go with whichever type of vaccine we might need to scale, and we need to think about that immediately and probably take it at risk. And I think the UK is well positioned as a place where we could manufacture. We haven't got all the capabilities, but we have got a lot of the capacity, a lot of the people who can make a real difference in this. And I think we can be a part of a global solution. And perhaps if you need to make it not just for the UK but for the globe, we can be part of that. And that's why I'm staying up with this, because we may need to input some of that into decision makers and global players who are deeply interested in, oddly, the types of things that we're doing in a way that they wouldn't normally be.
Yeah, absolutely. Just going to go to a couple of questions people are firing in. So Jamie Reed says global data are tracking over 650 trials globally from sponsors and institutes. So that's useful insight there, Jamie. I'll pick up afterwards.
Good from people is obviously there's a whole load of trackers that are knocking around now. We've tended to work off of the BioSentry one. You're mentioning one there. I'm aware of the Milkin one. So what I really need is help with tracking the trackers now, because there's so many trackers. And in a sense, ones that you think are good, ones that you think we should populate, ones that you think that haven't been so good. I'm keen to get a sense as to what's worked for you guys, and then we can share the best with the community, because this is evolving very rapidly. If you've got a favourite, or you think that we should be publicising it to our community, please tell us what's top of the trackers.
Yeah, absolutely. Comment here from Tina Crombie says, fantastic that we're in the game for antibodies, but what's the UK's position, negotiating position, for access to some of the emerging treatments if they show well through phase 3? So she mentions the Gilead treatment, remdesivir we mentioned last week. So, I mean, this comes to the question, you know, any of these solutions how are they going to be distributed around the globe? Who's going to get access to them? It's an interesting question, isn't it? Well,
my view is that if you're involved in the process of developing them, as I believe the UK stands an opportunity to do, not perhaps every step of the way, but it will be a global game, then you're more likely to be able to access them as they're distributed. There will need to be some discussion of this, and this is going to be political over the coming period of time. But you know, if you've been a partner globally, as the UK has traditionally been in everything since the development of penicillin with the Americans, then and as we work with the Chinese or we work with European partners, then we should be part of that global solution, and being at the heart, as the UK is in many of these global plays, the CEPI organisation, and being a good place to do clinical trial work or scale up work or answer some of the knotty questions. I think we're well placed to be at the nexus of a global engagement, and some of this will rely on existing relationships that you guys have already got.
Yeah. Okay, I need to move on. Just a quick note here about the EU plans. I mean, there's a bit of debate about how quickly the EU's moved, and obviously some dispute about that. But they have, I noticed yesterday, launched this 10-point action plan now, hinting at additional funding. So that's extending the recent Horizon 2020 call, I think it was. So I mean, things are moving there.
No, let's keep going fast. But yeah, I mean, I think it's keep an eye on it, and there's some new stuff this week.
Yeah, okay. The thing that we really should talk about in a bit of detail, Steve, is where you've got to with government on testing over the last few days. So why don't I hand to you on this bit?
So it's Thursday this week, isn't it? And I think on Saturday we saw the government set out a new plan, a new strategy for testing, and many of you may have joined us yesterday where the detail of that plan was set out to industry in a joint webinar with ABPI, BIVDA, ourselves, and the ABHI. And I think you can see that there's been quite a lot of that moving at pace. So lots of the detail came out. We'll make sure that that is available to those of you who didn't make it yesterday. If you're interested in this, in response to that, industry has engaged and stepped up. You'll have seen yesterday the announcement that there's going to be a new testing lab organised by AstraZeneca, supported by GSK and Cambridge, to do some additional testing. The super labs, the Milton Keynes site, is up and running with the Thermo Fisher backbone. And if you follow the Today programme, you may have heard Mark Stevenson of Thermo on this morning, Pascal Sorio on yesterday. So lots of this is happening, and we are stepping up to engage. If you are able to support on some of the deep technical challenges in testing, then the UK government is very keen to hear from you. Also keen to be able to buy consumables and get sustainable supply for that. So real opportunities there. And what's great is that there is a clear ask as to exactly what they want. And I think we've also had some honesty and some openness about the scientific challenges of doing the antibody testing. John Bell's blog at the weekend was very, very important on this. And I think there does need to be a reset and a look at what are the specs in antibody testing that can make a difference, whether that be scaling up on ELISA or whether that be novel approaches to it. But I think we've seen a real step change this week. I'm not going to go into it much more than this today, I think that's of use. Any questions or comments on this that are coming in? You're right, Jeff. Don't forget Audley Park or Glasgow being whole parts of the infrastructure, and you're right, it's spread across the UK. Equally, I never forget Randox. I think Randox are known for sponsoring the Grand National, but they're really in a Grand National themselves now as part of the testing effort from Northern Ireland.
Yeah, Steve, I just mentioned this. So a lot of people have said, how do we get involved? And actually, we saw great clarity on that webinar with the Secretary of State yesterday, didn't we? So full details at gov.uk/coronavirus-testing. And they're launching a new sourcing platform today for people to put in new ideas. So there's very clear routes in there. You were on the, I mean, questions coming in just, which I think I'll link to this next slide. So is 100,000 tests a day actually feasible in 3 weeks? Well, this is a question you and Paul Nurse got at the Select Committee yesterday. And I think Paul said it's a stretch target, didn't he? But do you want to kind of loop back on that? I mean, these are the comments that you...
I think what you're seeing is everybody busting a gut to do everything they can as fast as possible. I think that the centralised lab process, the Glasgow, Milton Keynes, Audley, Randox process is industrialising rapidly. I know that we need to make sure that people can dock into the NHS PHE process on one level, and that's happening fast. I know that veterinary labs are coming alongside. You could see from discussion with Crick that their capability is engineered and coming alongside. That can take some time, and I think we'll. And also there's the logistical challenge of resupply into a rapidly expanding sector there. So I think we're busting a gut to do it. I know people are keen to, and I hope that there's a more organised plan as to how to do that from yesterday's webinar and the materials the government have published. And I know everybody is committed to doing this, but doing anything scaling at pace is during a lockdown period is not easy, and has logistical supply challenges.
Okay, well let's ask people what they think about that, Steve, because we've just got a polling question I can drop in here, which is, to what extent do you feel your organisation's in a position to support the national effort to tackle COVID-19? So the government is being a bit clearer now about what it's looking for, but we'd be interested to know, people on the call, whether your organisation could get involved. So let's launch that poll. Let's just get this up.
Yeah. Well, if I can thank people already who have engaged, either by just simply participating in the webinars, understanding what's going on, being prepared to offer help. I think what I'm trying to do is make sure that there are ever more specific calls and clarity as to what is the most use and in the most places, because I think there's an absolute desire from many people to be supportive, but I think the clearer the ask can be from government or from others, the easier it is to respond, and that's what I'm trying to make us be able to do.
Okay, good. Keep voting, everyone. 2/3 of you have voted, more to go. All right, let's give it 5 more seconds and then I'll close it. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, good. I'll share the results with you. There we go. What do you think of that, Steve?
So it's great that a third are already or definitely involved. It's good that people are fairly likely, and I think it's honest that people can say that if they're not in a position to support or not very likely to do it. I think that that's also, you know, our life science sector is much broader than COVID-19. It's absolutely right, and you know, I've made this point to the Secretary of State. It's not right for everybody to re-roll into being a COVID company. There's absolute medical need that will continue down the years, and we should do. So I think we're conscious as we look to support members that that this is a breakdown. I'm not surprised to see. I'm keen that BIA continues to support people wherever they are in relation to this, and it's fantastic to be able to support those who are able to come alongside and make it more specific for them. And if you're not, then also how do you support the business going forward? And we'll talk a little bit about that going on in the next period.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a particularly positive feedback. Just so people know, that's 2/3 of the people on the call. It's about 100 people have voted on that. So that's a substantial number of companies already doing stuff. I've got to see a few people coming in with questions now about how they put forward ideas and who they contact. If you go to that hub that I noted just on the previous slide on gov.uk, coronavirus-testing, that gives you all the details about how to get in touch. And there's as I said, there's a sourcing platform where you can submit new ideas. So that's the route through on this.
I mean, I think I would just say to people, it's an evolving process, and in the same way as you've seen things like universal credit have millions of people apply to it, and the phone lines are jammed. I think there is a sense in which government is endeavouring to self-organise around this. I've seen transformation in a few days, but I think there is a bit of bearing with, and I think if that webinar yesterday and the information that will flow from that, I would encourage people to have a look at. And broadly, I think there is an immediate need. So they are most interested in things that are industrializable today and scaling today. And much as I am a massive champion for innovation, I think that that's almost the first question that will come alongside. But you know, I'm conscious of this, so I'm asking people to be a bit kind if you don't get responses. Basically, we're trying our best to make the information flows better, but it's a challenge for everybody at this time.
Yeah, on the industry call this week, they said that they were getting 400 suggestions or offers of help a day, which is clearly quite a lot to work through. So yeah, I think that's the right, Steve. Okay, good. You mentioned already the point about things developing on antibody testing. Do you want to say anything more about this? I mean, the 3 things we've got on the slide here, the kind of the results of the tests that they were doing in Oxford, of the things that they bought, which came up negative. So John Bell wrote that up in a blog. And then today we've just seen news about the kind of the evolution of the government strategy. Any more you want to say on that at this point, Steve?
So I think what's interesting here is that if you look at both the John Bell blog and the the other paper that was published on Tuesday, which I think we've put a link to on our website, about the detail of what they found in terms of the testing. We'll put it up if it's not there already. You can get a good sense of the problem that they're trying to challenge in this, and what is the problem. And I'm keen that, again, if we can get to the specifics of what the challenges are, then there's people in our community who may well be able to help with them. But let's have a look at start there. I think it's interesting to see that there is evolving thinking on an almost hourly basis. If you take the piece in the Times today, could you ramp up the process by which you did antibody tests on ELISAs, and do they work? I think is current thinking, but all of this I think is happening very much in real time, and it's really keep up to date with it.
Yeah. Okay. Good stuff. So on a slightly different note, new government guidance on social distancing. I mean, the reason we stuck this in here, Steve, is just kind of reinforcing this point that's in the quote on the bottom left. The government's not asking all businesses to shut. Important for businesses to carry on. And this is just some specific points of guidance for manufacturers on how to operate in the workplace, which I think is welcome, isn't it? Again, it just reinforces this point that, got to keep going if possible.
Yeah, I mean, people who are running businesses will know better than me as to whether this is how doable this is in your own environment. So it's useful for us to be able to feed back to government if this is useful. But you can see that there is a desire for business to continue.
All right, good. In terms of the impact, then, just the second poll we've got lined up today, Steve. Which of the following is closest to how your organisation's been impacted by the COVID situation so far? So we've heard. Yeah, go for it. I'll load the poll.
My organisation is continuing most operations as normal. My organisation has made minor changes. My organisation has made major changes to operations. My organisation has had to pause most operations. My organisation or my role has not been able to continue. So I've got my own bet as to where this one will come out, and let's see whether I'm right, but I'm not going to say it because it will. If you say during a poll, there's always a risk that you can influence it. But I hope you'll find it interesting to see where your peers and other organisations are. Of course, at the BIA we've virtualised, and I hope that you found our communications and our activity of value. But it's been pretty disruptive to us not being able to work from the office, and we're having colleagues off unwell as well. Okay, shall we take the answer?
Yeah, we're up to 3/4 of voting, so let me close and share that. There we go.
Well, I think it's no surprise to see that major changes to operations, about nearly half of you have had that, and minor changes to a third. I'm glad to see that there's nobody who's not been able to continue, and 10% had to pause most operations. I think shows just how disruptive this period is to the entire sector. Be interesting to benchmark this, and I don't know when Gareth talks later whether we could reflect on this with regard to other sectors and where we are compared to, I don't know who else. I mean, if you're running swimming pools, I imagine you.
Well, I think Gareth talking to me yesterday, he said he's got specific perspectives on auto and aero, so we'll listen to that with interest later. Okay, so let's just quickly wrapping up the news this week, Steve. You wanted to just flag a few things that have happened on the digital side, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you think about, we're talking a lot about testing, but if you look around the world, there is some interesting ways in which we are seeing the linkage of digital. I mean, one big change we've seen already, I think, is the virtualization of primary healthcare in the UK. Lots of people now are contacting their doctor by video link or by iPhone in a way that they weren't a few weeks ago, and that's becoming a normal thing. It'll be quite interesting to see whether people go back. But on the specifics of how you do diagnostics and testing and linking that to a digital platform, I think we're seeing lots of that happening. So we've got the sort of research elements here on the left-hand side, Precision Life and Helix is being used to work in the innovation of the research and development side of COVID. And then in the right-hand side, we've got a really interesting app being developed in Germany. It came out yesterday. That is that they're thinking of using for sort of surveillance, public health surveillance going forward. There's an interesting discussion about how the standards on which that operates are having at an EU level, and I was able to make the case only this morning to Cabinet Minister that we should make sure that the UK is engaged in that discussion, because it may be that we've got standards and interoperability that would be important that could go in alongside the Swiss system, the French system, because if we're ever going to go skiing again, and you need to be able to track and trace off of people who have been in that area, or you know, we've got some Welsh fans going to a rugby match in Ireland, and something awful was to break out in the future, it would be making sure those are interoperable, not just a UK scheme, that would be vital for public health measures of the future. It's an interesting thing I'm interested in. If members are interested, please talk to me about it.
Yeah, very good, Steve. So the last slide just picks up on a couple of questions that I'll just read out as a segue. In terms of government support, do we have an update or response from the Treasury on R&D tax credit rebates or advances? And what additional support is there going to be coming down the line for micro businesses or people who are pre-revenue? Those are questions we've looked at in the past. So just kind of the things that have moved in terms of government support over the last 7 days. Steve, we've seen news coming out that only 2,000 firms have been given access to the business loans so far, which just shows, I think that was Institute of Directors data that I picked up yesterday. There was this Innovate UK competition launched for new technologies to support resilience and productivity. Very, very short deadline on that, closed the 17th of April, and pretty small grants.
Yeah, but perhaps if there's a sole trader or two for whom this would make a difference, I think this is definitely worth looking at. It's a quick form this week. It's a de minimis grant. Be aware of it, and it is there. And if you've got nothing else to do over the weekend, then perhaps a form will make a difference. It's quite open and maybe a good thing to look at. Michael, you're right in saying that what we've also seen development is from the Chancellor is supporting charities. Obviously, they're a core part in terms of research charities of our sector, partnering with many of us, and they've had a real hit with either shops closed or other things. To answer the question, have we got specifics back from the Treasury? And the answer is no. We continue to make daily representation to them about how some of the processes that they've set up don't fit and don't seem to be able to work for our sector, and we've allied and gone alongside the arguments that you've seen others in the knowledge economy make about the package as it is at present not really fitting for many in our community. So I know some of it works for some people, but most of it doesn't, and we continue to make the case. But unfortunately, at the moment, we're not getting big positive sounds coming back from the Treasury at present. But we keep on, and we'll keep on again next week as well.
Okay, good stuff. Steve, if you've got a minute, I'm going to turn to Priya now, but if you want to keep looking through the questions and jump in at any point. I was just going to pick out a comment here, which is quite amusing, from Andrew Roberts, who says, can anyone working normally in these circumstances please say who they are? So that's an interesting segue as I turn to our next guest, which is Priya Mande from PsiOxus Therapeutics. Priya, can you hear me, and can you turn on your webcam, please?
Yes, and I have done so. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Steve, Michael. Thank you for the invitation. Can everybody hear me?
So, yeah, are you actually working normally at PsiOxus then? You didn't vote on that question, so that can't have been you.
We are, yes, it's a really good question, and delighted again to see that everybody is at least managing to continue some degree of operations. I think the major operational change that most companies have had to implement is very understandable, considering the circumstances. So for those just, Steve, Michael invited me to share some thoughts and share our experiences at PsiOxus Therapeutics. I should say that we don't have all the answers. Individual circumstances clearly call for bespoke solutions, but delighted to share some of our learnings and experiences if they can be of help and benefit to other member companies. So just to give some context, we're a privately owned cancer therapeutics company. We've developed and continue to develop a suite of cancer-killing viruses that can deliver different payloads to tumor cells. And we're 75 people strong. We're predominantly UK, although we do have some staff in the US. We've got 4 ongoing trials, and I have a very broad-ranging set of responsibilities which cover corporate development, finance, projects, project management, operations. So in terms of how COVID-19 has affected us, I've sort of separated it into 3 areas. Operationally, obviously, in terms of boots on the ground, or rather boots at home. Clinical trials, because clearly that's predicated upon access to hospitals and patients who maybe otherwise now have redeployment of staff to the COVID-19 effort. And we're running majority of our studies in the US. And then the third sort of macroeconomic backdrop in terms of investment and financing, the uncertainties of the markets, the impact and the implications that having in terms of partnering, deal making, and just general investment opportunities. So what I'd like to suggest is I go through the 3 of those in stage-wise fashion. But fundamentally, we looked at it from a pragmatic approach as an organisation. We wanted to ensure that we could keep the business operational, but we wanted to protect staff and continue to protect patients. And that was the sort of underlying philosophy. We decided very early on that we recognised we didn't have all the answers. No one has been in this situation, and that's the one thing that we as a management team really came together. So we wanted to be pragmatic, we wanted to be data-led, and we very much looked at it from a risk-based approach. So we set this up as a project, and we were quite fortunate, I think, in some respects, as a virus company, good viruses, but nonetheless, you know, we have that degree of virus awareness, and we were aware that there may be some rapid change in policies. So we set up home working very early on in March. Everyone had their setup at home, and we managed to get a little ahead of the curve on that. I know that other companies have taken different approaches, so again, this isn't to say that this is the right way to do things. We walked the risk and ran the plan, is sort of the phrase that we used in terms of risk management. We literally walked through every element of our operations, whether it was from the cleaning to the security to who was maintaining the IT servers, through to our clinical programs, talking to our investigators, working with our hospital sites. The US, the States, they actually operate as individual countries. So we have the challenges of trying to understand what was going on in New York State versus Texas versus California. But also the US healthcare system is very fragmented. So actually for us, from our perspective, cancer research institutions are for-profit businesses within the US healthcare environment. So at least for now, they want to run clinical trials as they need that opportunity. Obviously, there's clearly some redeployment of staff, and we've had to work very closely with those to understand what is and isn't possible. So going back to walking the risks, we literally looked at every element of what we were doing operationally, and then working with our suppliers, our vendors, our labs, our sites, our CROs, understanding what their business continuity plans were. The devil is unfortunately in the detail. There is no hard way of trying to avoid the hard work and effort that needs to go in. So file notes for new procedures, plan deviation notes. Fortunately, the MHRA and the FDA have provided tremendous guidance in terms of what is and isn't permissible. Obviously, in terms of deviations, remote audits, remote monitoring visits, even some remote source document verification procedures. So working closely with those. And also reaching out to the community and to the network. I have to say credit to the BIA and to Steve, Michael, to both of you. You know, learning from each other, talking to other management teams from other companies, trying to really leverage the networks that are going on, because we're all navigating our way through the decision making. We're feeling our way through the issues. None of us have been through this before. And then the second strand was that we were doing concurrently was looking strategically at what are our sort of investment levers? What are the key milestone events? And I would encourage all companies, if they haven't done this already, to have that frank conversation at board level. So we modeled out, you know, what was the time to our milestone delivery? What were the cash requirements? where were the value-added activities, what were some of those sensitivities and levers that we could pull to conserve cash given the uncertainty of the situation, what sort of storm could we weather in terms of a buffer, and that then allowed us to make these key operational and portfolio decisions and to have that very candid conversation with our board in terms of, you know, any immediate decisions that needed to be made around that. And then the final sort of real category and element that I would talk about is culture. It is exceptionally important to keep communicating with staff. Going back to our original sort of tenet in terms of protecting staff and protecting patients, that's what we're all about. Clearly, we want to deliver the assets and deliver shareholder value, but, you know, we have to look after the staff through this period as well. So we talked to them, and we were lucky enough that we're still small enough to feel like a family. To give, you know, companies an example, I realized quite early on in March that holiday and annual leave was, you know, really concerning people. Weddings were being cancelled, honeymoons were being postponed, and just took the decision to issue an email saying we didn't know what the solution was. We actually didn't have a plan at that point, but that we would sort it out. We would look after staff. No one was going to lose their annual leave due to COVID-19. And the volume of response that I had back was tremendous. So it's just about, you know, really reassuring staff that we care about them, because absolutely, of course, we all do. But in the rush as management teams to push forward, sometimes just having those conversations, very important in terms of, another example is we discovered that some staff were quite concerned about taking public transport. We moved them off public transport, keep the labs going, move to rota systems, put in social distancing procedures within the labs. In fact, our lab staff, we've got roughly up to about 20% who are still working on site, have developed their own shift working patterns. And with a view to everyone wanting to get through this as operationally as best we can. And the final point I'll just make on culture is not to underestimate the really important stuff like virtual coffee mornings. We've got quizzes going around, taskmasters. I think there was even a suggestion for a sort of happy hour, virtual happy hour. We're running remote mindfulness sessions where you literally dial a number and you've got someone on the other end, not quite heavy breathing, but there is someone that's talking you through relaxation techniques. And actually, I joined one recently and it was brilliant.
Let's sign Steve up. Good. Okay, well, you just talked about kind of where we're going to get to on this. I mean, where do you see the risks or concerns coming out the other side? You know, so I mean, we talked a bit previously, well, yesterday, didn't we, about kind of the financing side of things. I mean, is that one of the big challenges you see coming down the line, depending on how long this goes on for, right?
So every company's circumstances are quite different, but I know from speaking to my network that some companies have a really decent runway and can weather quite you know, a significant storm, others less so. And I think part of the problem is the uncertainty of the situation, right? This is why I think speaking to the board, speaking to your existing investors, and understanding what those levers are that you can do in order to develop a war chest is really critically important. I think sort of as we go through this and come out the other end, I think we all now recognize we're talking about quite a few months here in terms of trying to return back to normal. That renormalization, that emergence through this period is going to be interesting. From an operational perspective, and Michael, we were talking about this yesterday, you know, what is normal? What will normal look like when we get through this?
Yeah.
Really interesting challenge from an operational perspective, because we've got a number of staff who've said, well, look at me, I'm working really effectively from home. And actually, I rather like this, you know. Going back to the comment about, you know, not wanting to commute so much or travel so much, is there a need when you've got such effective webinars? I don't think anything will completely replace the face-to-face interaction, you know, clearly, but I think we will be looking and be part of a new normal as we come out of this.
Okay, good stuff. We're a bit up against it in terms of time, so I'm going to move on, Priya, but thanks, that's incredibly useful insights. If anyone's got any specific questions about how PsiOxus are handling things or wants to pick up on any of the comments that Priya made there, do chuck them in the questions box. One that I'll just pull out because it's quite funny. Where do you stand on wind chimes, Priya?
Okay.
That was a rhetorical question from Nicholas Gardner. Each to their own, I think, is our response to that, isn't it? Okay, good stuff. Gareth, turning to you. Do you want to turn your webcam on if you can? There you go, brilliant. Oh, what a fantastic backdrop.
Carefully curated.
You're going to have for lunch after this. So thanks for joining us. KPMG, one of our members that's done a lot of work that we've seen in terms of supporting your clients. I mean, you've got a fantastic resource centre up online on COVID-19, but we just thought it would be good to get you on to just have a talk in a bit more detail about some of the experiences that you've been kind of tracking across wider sectors, give us a sort of a broader perspective on things. So how would you say that other parts of UK industry compare with what we're facing in life sciences at the moment?
Yes, it's a good question. So what I'd also say is a lot of the organizations that I'm speaking with at the moment, yes, they have UK operations, but also for a lot of them, they are international businesses as well, whether global operations that are headquartered in the USK, like a GSK, for example, or they're operating only in a few markets in Europe. So this context, I think, is slightly wider for them. From a life sciences perspective, some of the larger, particularly pharma companies, are really trying to maintain business as is. They're considered key workers in a lot of markets. They're still trying to produce drugs, products from an OTC perspective, etc. There is some general worry on supply chain, but actually a lot of their projects, whether they're internal transformation projects, whether they're supply chain consolidation, are continuing. And they are, as Priya said, they are working through what they can to manage the disruption. There has been a big reduction in discretionary spend, and I think all businesses are tightening their belts. Luckily, everyone's saving on travel and expenses at the moment. And actually, I think we'll see some of those pieces will continue as businesses look to try and save cash in the short term. I think it's also important to recognise that in a couple of sectors, actually, profits have increased. So again, with a GSK, for example, some of their vitamin C product sales are up by 200–300%. So again, there are some small areas where we are seeing increases for smaller, and again, this is particularly on the pharma side, for some smaller pharma companies. Part of my background is integration and separation. So again, companies buying and selling assets. Some of those pieces are continuing. People recognize, particularly in the life sciences sector, that there is life after COVID-19, and so some of those key strategic pieces will continue. More widely in, for example, aerospace and defense, actually a business that has not really been impacted by COVID-19 from an operations perspective. Clearly, social distancing regulations and the need to implement home working, etc., are things they're grappling with, but actually their business and business model continues as is, and indeed they're going to start looking for opportunities to acquire assets after COVID is ended and see what they can get essentially on the cheap. We're seeing that with PE houses as well. So venture capitalists, private equity with large, quite varied portfolios in some instances, yes, are grappling with what COVID-19 means, and they're particularly looking at things like cash flow and halting some business operations temporarily. But again, they're really starting to try and look at what opportunities does that present to them post COVID in terms of picking up assets. Flipping to the other side, we've got some pieces like Automotive, where quite frankly nobody's buying cars or car parts, and actually their challenges are quite fundamentally different. We're seeing factories closing down across Germany, France, the UK, China, India, where there is no demand, and they are having to manage quite significant cost-cutting exercises, furloughing whole loads of employees, introducing part-time working, and I think they will really see cost constraints coming at the end of this. And then finally, we're also seeing a mixed bag on things like logistics businesses. So I've been working with a couple of EU logistics businesses as well as UK. One particularly is food distribution. what they're actually seeing is that they are considered key workers. They need to keep things working, but as a people business, they are really finding that COVID is stopping them. Again, Priya stole some of my thunder with her insights, as it should be. But things such as social distancing, things such as having to work in smaller groups is impacting productivity. But essentially, they've got a job to do, and they have to try and work out how can they keep their core business working. So if that means moving parcels or distribution to areas that are less impacted, they are having to really quickly grapple with what that means for some of their supply chains and distribution networks.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Well, look, you're in people and change. So what's your, if I were to say to you, give sort of 3 top tips to businesses on the call to support staff through the crisis, to make this work as best it can. What's your advice? Or what have you learned so far in terms of how people are managing things? What are the kind of the potential sort of best practice moves that people could be taking at this point?
So I think it's a bit of a mixed bag. I think firstly is if we want this to be successful, we've got to crack virtual working. So again, we've seen a lot of organizations, and look, it is easier for larger organizations because they often have virtual working technology in place. But even, for example, my own company has had to roll out Microsoft Teams within the space of a week. Again, we're a 16,000 person organization in the UK, where tens of thousands across the globe. And quite frankly, that meant a guy in Canada sitting in his living room producing training to send out. I think businesses have got to crack this. They've got to get those home working technologies out there to keep operations running. I think you've got to understand that there is going to be some slight drop in productivity as people get to know it. But what I would say is all the things that Priya said in terms of really taking this seriously around how can we keep our teams networked will help. So I think the first one is virtual working. The second one is there is something about employee mental health. All of the HR directors I'm speaking to, all of the ops directors I'm speaking to, they're really genuinely worried about their people. We've got people in their 20s and 30s stuck in 1-bed flat in London. We've got people who are having to deal with having kids underfoot all the time, as lovely as that is. People are finding it really difficult to manage all the things they have to do and work. So I think really checking in on your people. Look, again, I know we got the comment about wind chimes and about mindfulness, but I do think there is a piece around reaching out to your people and making sure they're okay. And that leads on to my third point, which is, again, probably not necessarily a best practice, but your people will remember this. They really will remember you as business leaders, how you stood up and led through this period of uncertainty. They will remember the organizations that looked after their staff, that were honest with their staff. So again, one of my pieces is when you are thinking of the measures you may need to put in place, furloughing, reducing working hours, etc., for this interim period, really carefully balance that against how your people are going to come out of this, because when it's over, they'll remember the people that helped them through, and they'll say goodbye to the people that they felt weren't supportive.
Yeah, really useful. Thank you. Okay, let's just turn to the future then. I've got a question come in here from Najib Rehman. Globalized supply operations are vulnerable. Does Gareth see an eventual move to a more decentralized or local operations with greater diversification and a reduction in singular global dependencies? Good question. So what is this going to make a big difference to the way businesses operate in future, do you think?
So this is that's a really interesting question. So specifically on supply chain, this is not going to be particularly helpful, but again, I think it's a little bit of a mixed bag. I mean, the economies of scale that you get from a global supply chain and the organization, the legacy that you've already got, where people have moved all their supply hubs to Singapore or to Switzerland, they've moved to low tax locations, they've got genuine global networks. Unraveling that is not a cheap or quick piece. What I would suggest instead is we're going to have to build more resilience into the system, but no one I'm talking to yet is saying that there is a desire to move away from global supply chains. Potentially you will see more slack built into the system, But since we're only a month in, or in some areas in Asia, 6 weeks, 2 months in, I don't think anyone's suggesting that at the moment.
Okay,
yeah, I mean, if I can comment, and then I'll comment on some of the other questions. Remember, Spanish flu went around the world in an era where there was much less globalization. So I'm not sure that deglobalizing ever is going to support, going to defeat some of the biology that we're that we're facing here. So I'm not instantly attracted to that argument, and certainly there will be people who will. It's interesting to see how responses work, but I think we know that efficiencies are gained, and actually scientific developments happen through global networks, and I would be continuing to defend that, and I think the solution will come through those things, going into looking amongst ourselves and only within countries. I don't think is the right way out of this. It's interesting that we've gone from ASMR to GDPR in some of the questions, but people are talking about supply chain issues. I think that there is going to be pressure on supply chain as things get very tight with regard to flights and other things, and I think we will see disruption. So we'll basically see COVID-19 material prioritized by most people in life sciences. I know it's difficult to get PPE, but you can understand why if we've got people in care homes or in hospitals who are struggling for it. So I think we are going to see disruption in certain areas into our sector, and we've got to get ready for that. Somebody mentioned the Evaluate COVID-19 conference, virtual conference that's likely to take place at the end of the month, beginning of May. We're working with the organisers, and you'll see some more from us on that next week. So a free partnering conference planned globally on COVID-19 issues coming up. Access, there's a little bit about access to samples and people who want to work on the research side of particularly needing access to sera. I don't have a solution to this, but it's a question that keeps coming back from our base. So it's on our list, and I'm trying to work it out. How do companies engage in the research base if they're trying to do work on COVID-19? How do you engage with that? And it's on my list of ones to look at, but I haven't got a solution yet, I'm afraid. But thank you. It's coming time and time again. And yeah, interesting that people are interested in how NHSX are doing their thinking on the digital solutions for this. I agree, it's one that I think needs a bit of work, and that's why I keep putting it back on, because I'm keen that we continue to engage with that discussion.
Okay, good stuff, Steve. We're nearly out of time. Gareth, I'm just going to move on a little bit, but thank you, really incredibly useful insights there. I thought it would be helpful, Steve, if we just kind of flagged up that there's a huge range of guidance and operations and HR matters that we've plugged in our microsite, including the excellent resources from KPMG, who've got a lot of content on there. But the other things I just flag, some really good webinars from CBI, specifically one on mental health, which was mentioned earlier by both Priya and Gareth. Lots of legal support on managing staff and the HR issues and the contractual issues around that from some of our legal member companies. Special plug for Field Fisher, offering pro bono legal advice to businesses that are actively involved in the effort on COVID-19. That's worth noting. So lots of details on all of those on our microsite. And then finally, Steve, it's the standard run-in at the end of these webinars. Do you want to go through this, or do you want me to?
Why don't you keep going?
Okay, so good. Our next webinar, next Thursday, Easter week. I hope you can still join us, though. We'll be focusing on the impact on life sciences charities and clinical trials. So there's a lot of movement on that and concerns which we flagged earlier in today's webinar. We're picking out in a lot more detail, hopefully with guests from Associated Medical Research Charities and possibly Cancer Registries UK as well. Do continue to sign up to Steve's weekly bulletin. Tuesday, that'll be coming out next week, won't it, Steve? Visit the microsite and do send through your tips or resources that you found that you think other people would find helpful. If you just send them to me, mwarren@bioindustry.org, I'll stick them up on the microsite. Finally, then, just a reminder of contact points. Again, details of all of these are on the microsite. So either screen grab it now or have a look on the microsite for the email addresses for how to get in touch with government or the industry work streams that we're leading on vaccines and antibodies therapeutics. And also any further comments on the government support schemes to Martin Turner at the BIA as well. And then finally, it's something we're saying every week at the moment, isn't it, Steve? If you want to talk to us more closely about engaging with us or working with us or joining us as a member, do get in touch. We're always really keen to talk to businesses and organisations across the sector. Michael McGivern is our membership lead at BIA, so drop him a line if you'd want more information. Okay, good. Questions that you finally respond to, Steve, in the last 3 minutes?
Well, I thought I had a crack at most of them, so
yeah,
I sort of intervened early on those, but thank you. These comments are really helpful for us, and they do help guide our thinking, as do the polls. So thank you very much.
All right, good. Well, that's it, Steve. You want to say goodbye to everyone? I'll just say thank you so much to Priya and to Gareth for joining us today. Fantastic contributions. I hope everyone found that as insightful as I did. Steve, you know, I want to wish everyone a happy Easter.
Yeah, happy Easter. Enjoy, and I'm interested to find out how people have done Easter egg hunts with their virtual Easter egg hunt. If you can crack that one, I'm keen to get your experience on it.
Okay, good stuff. Hopefully see some of you again at our webinar next Thursday. Thanks everyone. Happy Easter.
Happy Easter. Thanks. Cheers. Bye.